you all very much for being here. So I will read a little bit from Flight Risk, which came out in 2021. I write political fiction disguised as page turners, and this book has a great deal to do with art, race and gender, and the fossil fuel extraction industry, but it is a thriller. The legacy from my mother is 17 things. 1. A small white house in the hills of West Virginia. The paint, fading even in my childhood, surely curls back now, peeling away in long crumbling strips, exposing bare wood to the elements. Home, nest, scene of the crime. No one lives there now except the wild things. 2. A craving for nicotine. I chew gum, fiddle with paper clips, gnaw the ends of yellow pencils. 3. A thirst for hard liquor. 4. A taste for rough men. Hers were bikers and truckers. Mine were attorneys, surgeons, sons of wealthy families, boxers, men who owned boats. All self-declared masters of their various universes. They seemed powerful, bold, magnetic. Control is sexy, until it's not. Married now, 2 years to John, a Darcy, a knightly, a truly good man. I like to think I have outgrown this particular inheritance. 5. A hunger to run. 6. A taste for cheap food. Hamburger Helper, Kool-Aid, Oscar Mayer. Uniform slices of rubbery pink bologna, red rim smeared with mayonnaise, squashed between spongy white slices of bread. Tuna casserole made with cream of mushroom soup and gray canned peas with potato chips crumbled on top. Heinz ketchup squeezed onto Kraft macaroni and cheese and stirred with a fork until orange. In John's circle, such things aren't eaten. They're punchlines, the stuff of a Castro Marx. I cook them alone in the kitchen at night after he's fallen asleep and eat standing up at the counter, staring out over the Black Lake. 7. A suspicion of the state and its services. Social workers, police, anyone who wants to help us. 8. Silence. What you don't say can't haunt you. Plead the 5th. 9. A love of dark licorice, sweet like danger. In my childhood, it was an exotic treat, rare and expensive, a delicacy, a thing that miraculously appeared at Christmas and birthdays or in the pockets of the men my mother saw. I'm told the taste for licorice is hereditary. You like it, or you don't. 10. My long-boned, capable hands. They can change a tire, build a table, twist stuck lids off jars, break a limb. 11. A belief in ghosts. 12. A jumping metabolism, skittish. My friends here in Chicago often ask what diet I'm on, or, more quietly, which pill I take, and where they can get some. 13. A fear of incarceration, whether by reason of insanity or crime. 14. A love of fairy tales. She used to read them to me at bedtime. I would touch the illustrations with my finger while her scratchy voice unspooled the tale. 15. A fear of children. Their messes, their perpetual demands, their softness, the terrible fragility of their bodies. 16. A tiredness bedded down deep in my bones. Even before I was old enough to drink, I woke in the mornings exhausted, worn and bleak, thinking, another day? An old woman inside a young girl. And in my mother's eyes, that same look. 17. Grief, like an ocean, like madness. So that's the introduction to Isabel Morales, the protagonist of Flight Risk. She's an artist in Chicago, concealing her very difficult past from her husband. And when her mother dies in prison, she goes back to West Virginia to figure things out. But the reason that I'm in Florida right now this month is to launch my new book. It's also a thriller, a historical thriller. It's called One Brilliant Flame, and it's set in 1886 in Key West among the cigar industry and also among the Cuban rebel insurgency against colonial Spain. Key West, most people don't know, Key West was the offshore rebel base for the Cuban insurgents. Many of them were involved with the cigar industry in one way or another. It's told by 6 different narrators, 3 young women and 3 young men, and I'll give you just a small taste of the 3 young women. So this perspective is Zenaida, and I just have to tell you, I love the little icons. We came up with a different icon for each of the narrators to help readers kind of hook in and keep it straight. And so Zenaida has a little pot of ink and a quill pen. I'll show you the others when I get to them. Okay, so this is Zenaida speaking. Outside the tall windows of the galera, I stood with my mother and other women who were free from work in the afternoon and who arrived at the factory to gather in clusters, our parasols jostling, and listen to the latest installment of the Russian novel the new lector had brought. Ostensibly, I too was there to listen, to better myself, as my mother said, to get an education. But, as always, I stood where I could watch Chaveta. Nimble, swift, and slim, her fingers flickered as she twisted the tobacco into a tube, wrapped it, and slicked it down with resin. Her hand on the knife trimmed the ends with a certainty I envied, the way my mother chopped an onion or the head from a hen, utterly free of hesitation, sure of purpose, as if doubt were unknown to her, as if she never wondered what to do. The new lector's voice described the vacillations of Anna Karenina, who seemed far more comprehensible to me, driven by desires, acting, then drawing back, anguished, judging herself, trying a different path, stumbling. She felt more real than the people I knew in my own life, who never seemed to question what they did, all so committed, so passionate, so sure, whether wresting Cuba from Spain's grasp, or marching in a strike, or making fistfuls of American dollars. They all seemed to know what and whom they wanted, while I watched and longed and wondered, unsure of what was right, unsure of what to do. And so I did nothing. I obeyed my mother, observed, listened, played it safe. The Maceo is a guerrilla soldier, and he's named after the great Cuban general Antonio Maceo. He has escaped from enslavement, which was still legal in Cuba in 1886. Though Maceo had arrived on the steamer from Havana, he had not yet come to our boarding house, which was strange. Chaveta said he was staying a few nights with the Bozas first, and was said to be unwounded. I felt a spasm of anxiety, remembering Celida Boza's beauty on stage when she chose the Bolita Ball. Was she the reason he stayed with them? He had come to rally troops, Chaveta said, to raise funds, to inform us of the progress in the field, and to wait for secret instructions from the Cubans in New York. He didn't yet know how those instructions would arrive, and he was seeking a way to smuggle them back to the guerrilla fighters, a way that could not be detected if the Spaniards captured him. Bent over her workbench, Chaveta blew a dark strand of hair from her face. Her cheeks were flushed with the heat of the galera. Outside, a breeze cooled us. The shade of my pale yellow parasol shielded me from the sun, but still it was hot. The full feeling from the good food at lunch made me drowsy. The handsome new lector read on, but my mind drifted from the story of Oblonsky and Levin and Anna and their lusts and woes as Chaveta's hands twirled and spun the brown leaves into objects men would kiss to life and suck and burn. Her head bowed over her work, a quick smile flashing on her face from time to time when some line from the lector pleased her. "Girl," a deep voice above and behind my shoulder. I turned. His eyes were dark and steady, and he wore a soldier's garb, mended, clean, a rebel fighter's clothes the color of forests. He smelled of leather, soap, and horses. Hot flutters beat my belly. Masayo, I said. Drink coffee with me. His voice stayed low, but still the other women glanced, cutting their eyes at each other. My mother's face was very still, but for a tiny twitching at the corner of her mouth. No, I said, I'm listening to this. You're listening to fiction. His dismissive smile was faint. I'll tell you something real. My mother looked at me, her eyebrows arching so high they nearly hit her blue head wrap. Leave me alone, I said, I'm busy. I'll call on you this evening, he said. I shrugged. Do what you like. His breath stroked the nape of my neck and my hairs quivered electric. Always, he said. Without turning to stare, I knew everything about Masayo by heart. His skin smooth and fine and easy to covet, like polished teak. Touchable, sleek. It sloped up over his cheekbones, which my fingertips hungered to trace. His brown-pink mouth was candy, ripe fruit, obscene and sweet, as if his lips were plump with juice. In comparison, I felt my own ugliness, all my features just slightly shy of perfect harmony, just close enough to beauty to fool others, but madden me when I prodded them with my fingers in the looking glass. I had studied him for hours while he slept in the sickbed at my mother's boarding house, fevered from his bullet wound. I stood stock still, letting the moments pass, staring hard at the lector on his high platform to keep from swaying. As if he could feel my gaze, the lector read a sentence directly to me, his eyes on mine, but the sense of it did not penetrate my mind. Chaveta pounded her knife on the table in approval. Other rollers followed her lead, and the thunder of metal on wood filled the air, deeper and stronger than the applause of clapped hands. When it faded, I felt cool emptiness behind me where Masayo's body had been, and the air no longer bore his scent. I glanced back to confirm the truth. He was gone. My mother's elbow nudged my ribs. Mama, stop, I said. It's nothing. She laughed. This is an incredibly special reading to me because I dedicated this novel to my beautiful Key West aunts, 3 of them, and one of them just arrived and is in the back row. I haven't seen my Aunt Linda in a few years, and it's beautiful that you came here. Thank you. And my cousin Tisha, here is my cousin Jerry, and it's really hard to not cry on camera right now, so thank you all for being here. Okay, so I will read a chapter. So I wanted to write a villain. I think in the interest of time, maybe I can do both. Okay. I'll tell you about the villain in a minute. First, now I will read to you from Chaveta's point of view, the cigar roller, and her little icon is in fact a cigar. A wooden rectangle with 5 rectangles inside. That was our house in El Barrio de Gato on the far corner of Virginia and Duval, exactly like 1,000 other workers' houses here. If it were a cigar box and I opened the lid, you'd see the little parlor at the front with the wood stove we almost never needed to use. My mother was proud of the bright flowered cotton curtains she'd sewn from sacks. They hung at all 3 windows. Then you'd see the bedroom for the 6 of us kids, our straw-stuffed pallets side by side on the floor, the walls papered with pages we picked from old newspapers, neatly glued, some yellowing, the recent ones still white. And you'd smell the warm, comfortable animal smell of us all nestled in our blankets. In the evenings, sometimes I used those newspapers to teach the little ones to read, sounding out the words by lamplight. Then, my parents' bedroom, the only room with a door, so they could keep making more of us, Papi said. And then the kitchen, with its cook stove, where a folding screen in the corner let us bathe with privacy, though no peace. One naked child after another ran through the house, wet and shrieking, as my mother grumbled after them with the towel. The long, thin rectangle of the hallway ran along the south wall and ended at the back door, which led outside, where 5 wooden steps took us down to the water pump and the privy we shared with our neighbors. Papi had added a front porch, a luxury, where we sat at night for the cool breezes. All the cigar workers had these little wooden box houses slapped up fast as business boomed, side by side like tinder. Back when he drank less and was fun, my father used to call me my little hatwe. I'd climb up barefoot on the table and swing his chaveta like a sword. "Death to Spaniards," I'd yell, leaping down. "Death to the lying dogs." My mother didn't care for my games or for the nickname my father gave me, the name of a warrior chief who fought the conquistadors and was burned at a stake. So that name died. Chaveta stuck. My father said I had Taino in me from his blood and Arawak from my mother's, that while the Spaniards claimed they had expunged all Indio blood from the island, that was a Spanish lie. Arawaks were fiercer, my father said, which was why it was so hard for him, a peace-loving man, to wrangle my mother like a wild horse that wouldn't be broken. I laughed. "What do you know of horses?" "Exactly nothing," he rolled his eyes, "which is why it took so long to tame your mother." No one would ever tame me. No one. So in 1886, Key West burned to the ground. And arson was suspected. There were a variety of motives. And in this novel, there are and another one of my beautiful Key West ants just ended. Hello, thank you. So all of the 6 narrators have motivation to want Key West to burn. So it's kind of a whodunit based on historical fact. And I was very interested in writing a female sadist into literature. I'm a literature professor, and in my experience, I have never come across a true female sadist. Female dominatrices, yes, but not sadists, someone who derives erotic pleasure from causing pain. Plenty of male sadists, really creepy, we all know about those from TV shows all the time and life. But not so much women, so I thought, oh, that would be an interesting challenge. So you get to hear Sophia's point of view. She's the daughter of a factory owner who also owns plantations back in Cuba. She says, "At dusk, I sat sewing on the veranda. The sprawl of purple bougainvillea screened me from the street, and a small kerosene lamp lit my work. It was a decidedly romantic setting. My mother was off visiting her pious Catholic friends, my father was dining at the Hotel Russell with business associates, and my grandmother was upstairs in bed, no doubt already half intoxicated on her sherry and reading old Cuban romances. Even the maids had the evening off. Señorita," a young man mounted the steps. It was the cafetero, the one people called a fool. "I have a message for your father," he said, "from my boss at the coffee roastery." No one else was about. I studied him in the lamplight. His eyes were dark and beautiful, his black hair thick. The muscles of his arms bulged nicely, threaded with thick veins. "Come," I said, "sit here." I patted the cushions next to me on the settee. He hesitated, twisting his cap in his hands. "Oh, I couldn't, miss." "No, really," I said, "do. You must." He sat. I could hear his breath. I embroidered, pulling turquoise floss through the damask again and again in precise and tiny stitches. There was no sound but his breathing and the sliding of the thread. He stared at the fabric, hooped taut, and at my hands, which did have a peculiarly beautiful waxen glow in the lamplight, very pale and very smooth. We both sat there watching my hands' serene and delicate movements, and I wondered if he could even think such words as spellbinding, or mesmerizing, or exquisite, if he even possessed such a vocabulary. He probably couldn't compliment me properly if he tried. He'd likely manage only beautiful or pretty. How dull it would be, such a courtship. The cafetero said nothing. Paucity of vocabulary aside, he should have at least tried, but he simply sat there. This irritated me. I saw there that his hand had dropped to the little expanse of green silk. And things start happening, but I want to respect the time limit. sorry, oh, I still have 5 minutes. Oh, I was counting myself. Oh, well, okay, then you get to hear what happens. Okay, all right, very good, okay. So, the cafetero said nothing. Paucity of vocabulary aside, he should have at least tried, but he simply sat there. This irritated me. I saw, though, that his hand had dropped to the little expanse of green silk that stretched between our two laps, and it now lay very near my thigh. But it didn't move closer. It didn't dare. He said nothing. I glanced up at his face. He was no longer staring at my exquisite hands with their serene and waxen glow, but at my throat and décolletage, which was, if I remembered correctly, quite prettily arranged and edged with golden lace, though I'd been expecting no particular company. His dark eyes rose to mine, and they were sweet and hungry. I looked down at that hand, brown and rough against our green silk settee, and my needle moved through the air quite slowly and deliberately. Its sharp steel tip came to rest lightly upon his flesh, and then pressed. It pushed in just a little. The cafetero gasped. A red pearl of blood welled. I met his eyes, which were confused and pained and utterly humble, and a strange, delicious heat tugged low in my belly. The air smelled different, an unexpected kind of hot, burnt scent, like winter lightning. My legs shifted inside my skirt. I pulled away the needle. My eyes locked on his, and I lifted his great brown paw and leaned over it. My tongue lapped away the blood. He gasped again. Another, smaller pearl squeezed slowly out and sat there, red in his brown skin. I licked it off. He stared at me with his full lips parted, his eyes still hurt and wondering, as obedient as a hound's. I set his hand on the place in his lap that had been stirring, and he groaned. With men, the best way was to exit quickly and mysteriously, leaving them wanting and confused. So I did. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm at 124 if you want to talk about the book. Take care.
Thank you so much. Joey Castro, everybody.